or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Elaine, and for the next hour I will be reading from the June 20th, 21st, 2026 issue of Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And first article, Trump's moves test his grip on GOP. President Trump has delivered the same retort to political allies who have offered him strategic advice in recent weeks, according to people with knowledge of the conversations. I'm the president and you're not, is what he said. 17 months into his second term, Trump is increasingly relying on his own gut instincts, dismissing the Council of Aides, conservative lawmakers, and longtime associates. The result has been a series of decisions that have confounded and frustrated Republicans, heightening fears that voters will punish the GOP in the November elections. And testing Trump's iron grip on the party, Trump grew the ire of hawkish conservatives and some Republican lawmakers this past week when he agreed to a preliminary peace deal with Iran that they argue offers a financial lifeline to Tehran without doing enough to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions. Reagan is rolling over in his grave, says Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, who was defeated in a primary race earlier this year by a Trump-picked candidate. He argued that the Iran deal doesn't accomplish the administration's war aims. This is the worst foreign policy blunder in decades. The president also blew up the senator's plans to quickly confirm a new intelligence chief and renew a critical spying law, preventing his own nominee from appearing at a confirmation hearing so that his acting pick for the job could serve in the role longer. Trump said he would refuse to sign legislation reauthorizing the spying law, long a priority for his Republican allies in Congress, until lawmakers approve a voter identification bill that GOP leaders insist doesn't have enough support to pass. As he has faced criticism from some of his own party, Trump has made comments in recent weeks that have stunned his political allies, according to people who have spoken with GOP lawmakers and strategists and provided fodder for Democratic political ads. Trump has said that he doesn't care about the midterm elections. He has played down the effect of high prices on Americans, saying, "I love the inflation." And on Wednesday, he said Iran should be able to keep some of its ballistic missiles after his national security advisors had made destroying Tehran's ballistic missiles capability a primary objective of the war. White House officials said Trump's off-the-cuff style is one of his political gifts. Trump's team knows that he is the ultimate decider on policy, the officials said. No president has worked harder or delivered more than President Trump, White House spokeswoman Olivia Wales said, pointing to his work on immigration, the economy, and national security. Inside the White House, some aides have privately expressed frustrations about Trump's recent moves. His decision to appoint his housing chief, Bill Pulte, as acting intelligence director rankled some of the president's aides, according to people familiar with the matter, many of whom have clashed with him behind the scenes. Trump has in turn expressed frustration with his staff, knocking advisors for discouraging him from talking about his immigration policies ahead of the midterms, people said. For much of his second term, Trump has commanded unwavering control over his party, but congressional Republicans are increasingly offering blunt assessments of Trump's actions. Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, who has rarely criticized Trump in public, in a statement Thursday raised objections to the preliminary agreement Trump signed with Iran, saying that it negotiates away the victories of the war. Trump has privately expressed frustration with Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican, South Dakota, citing his inability to pass the voter ID bill. Trump has told allies he is sick of hearing no from Thune, but the Senate leader has noted there isn't enough support in the Senate to move the voting legislation. The total control that Trump once had over Congress just isn't there anymore, said Ron Bonjean, a former spokesman for House and Senate Republican leadership. Wales, the White House spokeswoman, said Trump has worked closely with Thune and House Speaker Mike Johnson, and he expects all Republicans in the 119th Congress to continue delivering on the America First mandate the American people issued. For months, Trump has resisted warnings from Republicans and some of his own advisors that the war was worsening the GOP's political problems. Voters have expressed alarm in polls at high gas prices, which surged after Iran's limited traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. When asked last month about the extent to which Americans' financial situation motivated him to make a deal to end the war, the president replied, "Not even a little bit." "I don't think about Americans' financial situation," he said at the time, drawing criticism from fellow Republicans. "I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon, that's all." In recent weeks, some of Trump's advisors have ramped up the warnings, telling the president that global oil stockpiles were dwindling, according to people familiar with the matter. On Wednesday, Trump's messaging on the war shifted. He acknowledged for the first time that continued war could have led to economic catastrophe and that oil reserves were on track to run out in about 4 weeks. The preliminary deal, he contended, would lead to a rapid economic recovery. And everyone in Trump's cabinet is eating sauerkraut. J.D. Vance, JFK Jr., and other officials swear by a diet of grass-fed meat and fermented foods. A new diet is sweeping through President Trump's cabinet, and it involves heaping portions of sauerkraut. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, and Vice President J.D. Vance have all embraced the diet, drawn by the promise of slimmer waistlines and glowing skin. They all apparently have determined the health benefits outweigh the slightly sulfurous odors that have been the cause of some domestic friction. "Within 30 days, I lost 20 pounds, Kennedy said at an event in Michigan this week. J.D. Vance is also on the diet, and you can see how different he looks. The diet is the brainchild of Dr. Sean O'Mara, who advises his high-profile patients to eat fermented foods such as sauerkraut and kimchi alongside grass-fed steak and to abstain from alcohol and sugary foods. O'Mara says the diet leads to a reduction in visceral fat, which wraps around organs, as well as more robust microbiome, which can help with digestion. Kennedy, 72, was the first to convert. Lutnick, age 64, and Duffy, 54, followed suit. Vance, age 41, committed to the diet for Lent earlier this year and has stuck with it. "I tend to like to work with older people because the return on investment is so much greater. It's like taking over a sinking ship, a company that is headed to bankruptcy," O'Mara said. He declined to discuss his patients, citing privacy concerns, but people familiar with the matter, said Kennedy, Lutnick, and Duffy, have all seen Dr. O'Mara. Kennedy began the diet about a year ago after meeting with O'Mara. Though he is sometimes turned off by the tangy and pungent taste of sauerkraut, he found the diet helped him shed fat and reduced aches and pains. He also credits it with eliminating atrial fibrillation he has been experiencing. The Trump administration officials on the diet have been known to trade tips when they are gathered at the White House. Online commentators recently remarked that Vance was looking thin in a photo posted earlier this month. Trump has at times resisted cutting out unhealthy foods. At the NBA Finals earlier this month, he munched on pizza and French fries and drank Diet Coke. He loves a well-done steak with ketchup. Trump's campaign plane frequently stocked McDonald's cheeseburgers and Chick-fil-A sandwiches. O'Mara first started advising politicians and cabinet members during the second Bush administration as one of the physicians assigned to assist the White House. Now, in private practice, he specializes in full-body MRIs, which look for fat and can be a risk factor for type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and metabolic syndrome. For snacking, O'Mara recommends Old World cheese that includes blue cheese, gorgonzola, or Parmesan on a wheel, which Lutnick eats plain without a cracker. Lutnick first spoke about the diet with Kennedy when the two traveled to Colorado. Lutnick has stayed away from red meat for years, worried about cancer. Lutnick also gave up Diet Coke and has switched to plain iced coffee. Vance has stayed committed to the diet, often eating eggs, sauerkraut, pickles, blackberries, and raspberries for lunch. and beef or lamb with sauerkraut for dinner. On Air Force 2, he snacks on grass-fed beef jerky or eats a hamburger with cheese, no bun, and a side of fermented vegetables. The administration officials who adhere to the diet have all different ways of getting in enough fermented foods. Kennedy often travels with a stash of sauerkraut. Lutnick has started to make fermented vegetables at home in lieu of eating store-bought sauerkraut. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican, recalled bumping into Duffy last year and remarking that his skin was glowing. Duffy recommended that he see O'Mara, and now McCarthy is a convert. He told me I was the worst case he'd ever seen, but he's also positive, he said. You've got great potential, McCarthy recalled of his first meeting with O'Mara. McCarthy said he lost 4 inches around his waist. He's talked up the diet to members of the Congress. Optimization plans at O'Mara's practice start at $8,000, according to his website. A direct consultation with O'Mara will cost you $18,000. He offers to accompany clients to the grocery store to teach them about picking fermented foods in the back of the refrigerator section, where there is less light that could degrade the nutrients and the living microbes. O'Mara, getting emotional in an interview, said it's his life calling, noting that people say feeling healthy helps them communicate better and have more energy for a stressful job. Nothing will improve somebody's appearance more and their performance, he said. New dietary guidelines rolled out last year by Kennedy and Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins for the first time recommended consuming fermented foods such as sauerkraut. Cheryl Hines, Kennedy's wife, said last year that Kennedy wakes up at 6:30 every morning to cook steak and eat sauerkraut. We'll be in the car dressed up and I'll have my little clutch, right? One of my good bags that I only take out every once in a while because I want to keep them nice, Hines recalled in an interview on Katie Miller's podcast. And he'll hand me a bag of sauerkraut and say, "Can you put this in your bag?" And I'll say, "I actually cannot." And the DHS to cut back plan to use warehouses for jails. The Department of Homeland Security is expected to scrap plans to use 7 warehouses purchased as part of a $38 billion program under then-Secretary Kristi Noem to flip them into large-scale immigration detention centers, according to a person familiar with the decision. The warehouses will either be sold or used for other purposes, the person said. The department said the agency is moving swiftly to utilize existing detention space with our state and county partners. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement bought 11 vacant warehouses over the winter, spending more than $1 billion. Noem had pressured immigration officials to try to open the new detention centers by the end of the year. The properties largely weren't zoned for detention and didn't have working plumbing to support large detainee populations. At the time, the government said it planned to acquire and convert more than 24 warehouses into detention centers and processing sites. Combined with 10 other existing facilities it planned to purchase, they would collectively hold more than 92,000 detainees. Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin, Noem's successor, paused the warehouse plan after he took office in March. The DHS's Inspector General recently announced a probe of the warehouse to detention program. DHS is expected to allow the closure of Florida's Alligator Alcatraz, a state-run facility built in the Florida Everglades that Noem had relied on to increase detention capacity. The New York Times earlier reported on the change in ICE's plan. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Also in U.S. news, Vegas doubles down on the affluent. Sin City is no longer a bargain destination as it increasingly bets on wealthier travelers. A trip to this desert city once meant dirt cheap hotel rooms and buffets, all subsidized by gambling revenue. Now visitors organize their trips around big-ticket events and pay top dollar for everything else while they're in town. Post-pandemic, Las Vegas is built to cater to the well-off. Hotel rates have risen faster than in any other major market in the U.S. New venues are drawing visitors to town for pro football, concerts, and Formula One racing. A $26 bottle of water went viral last year. Not long ago, lower and middle-income families and young partiers on tight budgets made up most of the visitors to Las Vegas. In 2019, 28% of visitors lived in households earning six figures, according to the city's Visitors Authority. Last year, 75% were in that income bracket. Starting in the 1990s, Ed Shaplow, who lives in Chelan, Washington, visited Vegas twice a year. He runs 3 small businesses, including a fruit farm. He and his wife would put together a 5-night trip, which, including meals, flights, and multiple shows, cost under $1,000. Their last visit was in 2023, when they stayed at the budget hotel Circus. Even then, Vegas was starting to become out of reach. Shaplow was surprised by the hotel's resort fee, now $45 per night plus tax, and the high cost of everyday items across the city. They could afford only one performance, a little-known act at a casino. The couple looked into visiting this past fall, but were deterred by the prices for airfare and hotel. We just wrote it off as it's not worth it, he said. Las Vegas usually reflects the American economy and then some. Few places were hit harder by the 2008-2009 financial crisis or the early COVID lockdowns. The city rebounded thanks to the YOLO travel and spending boom that followed. Now, Las Vegas, like the economy more broadly, is increasingly dependent on spending by a smaller group of well-off people who are often invested in the booming stock market. Nationally, households earning more than $125,000 a year spent nearly 8% more in March than they did in January 2023, adjusting for inflation, according to the New York Fed. Those earning under $40,000 spent about 2% more. The number of visitors to Las Vegas fell 7.5% in 2025, largely because of declines in lower-income and Canadian visitors, according to Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. Statewide revenue from baccarat, a game popular with wealthy people, doubled in the last year, while the slot machine revenue rose 5.5%. Steve Hill, president and CEO of the Visitors Authority, points to gloomy consumer sentiment to explain the drop in visitors. Discretionary purchases are going to take a back seat, and Vegas is a very discretionary decision, he said. At the lower-end Plaza Hotel and Casino downtown, where rooms are an average of $110 a night, including resort fee, the number of visitors is down about 3% this year, though the ones who do come are still spending on gambling and dining. The people who aren't showing up are international visitors and those who drive into town. That's someone sitting in California or Arizona saying, let's drive to Vegas for the weekend. We're not seeing that like we used to, said Jonathan Jossel, the hotel's CEO. Meanwhile, the high-end Wynn Resorts, where the average daily rate in Vegas is $592, is thriving as the richest customers spend freely. A measure of profit per hotel room there rose from $87 per room in 2019 to $190 in 2025. Executives told investors on the company's recent earnings calls that they can make more money by charging fewer customers more for hotel rooms. They have said the property is getting a boost from visitors who have made money from the artificial intelligence boom. Earlier this year, Zachary Hinckley enjoyed the $26 avocado toast at the Wynn's Terrace Point Cafe with his son and son's fiancée. Hinckley, 49, who owns a landscaping company in the Salt Lake City area, browsed Rolex watches at the hotel mall afterwards. Hinckley's family was visiting for a daughter's cheerleading competition and stayed in a rental home off the Strip. We live in nice homes. I don't want to go to a dump in Vegas and smell cigarette smoke from 1974, he said. To meet the strong demand from the wealthiest customers, Caesars just remodeled its 2 palatial presidential suites and 29 sky villas that start at $1,500 a night for a 1-bedroom. Las Vegas once offered cheap hotel rooms and buffets as loss leaders to lure gamblers into casinos. But gambling is a less important source of revenue for the city, which is making more money from events, restaurants, and shopping. About 26% of revenue comes from gambling now, said Chad Bainon, a gaming industry analyst at Marquee. Some lower-end properties on the Strip are rolling out all-inclusive packages for room, meals, and other amenities, and even the nicest hotels can be a deal in the off-season. On a summer weekday, visitors can often snag a room at a five-star property for under $150 a night, not including resort fees. But the factors keeping budget travelers away are multiplying. Higher gas prices make a drive more expensive. The demise of Spirit Airlines eliminated many of the cheapest flights to the city. At the same time, Vegas has pivoted toward more upscale offerings. In 2023, opening of the Sphere, where musical acts perform alongside cutting-edge visual effects in an immersive dome, accelerated the city's transformation into an events-driven town. The Formula One motorsports race came to the city that same year, offering many tiers of tickets that run into the thousands of dollars. The Sphere set a high bar for other entertainment venues in the city, said Mark Baldane, who oversaw building Allegiant Stadium, which is home to the NFL Raiders. Baldane is president of the Athletics, the Major League Baseball team building a new stadium on the Strip, scheduled to open in 2028. About 22% of seats will have access to premium areas such as lounges. The seats already on sale are selling briskly, he said. Hiram Louie, 65, flew in from California to see K-pop act BTS at Allegiant Stadium with his wife and daughter. They paid more than $300 for each ticket. Dinner at a nice restaurant was $150 per person. They tried to visit a BTS pop-up shop with a long line. All in all, the trip ran about $4,000. And the Obamas surprised first visitors to center. Former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama surprised the first 100 visitors to walk through the doors of the new Obama Presidential Center, personally greeting them on Friday. The Obamas, joined by former Reading Rainbow host LeVar Burton, also read Where the Wild Things Are to 25 schoolchildren at the Chicago Public Library branch inside the center. When the former president read Maurice Sedlak's line about being king of all the wild things, Michelle Obama interjected with, "Although there were no kings," to applause. In the photo to the left, Obama hammed it up for a photograph with the children. Later, awed guests shook hands with the Obamas against the backdrop of colorful 38-foot-tall painting depicting the map of Chicago, inspired by Carl Sandburg's 1914 poem about the city, stormy, husky, brawling city of the big shoulders. As the last of the first group of guests passed through, the Obamas quickly exited, and the museum opened its doors to the rest of the visitors. The Juneteenth opening followed a star-studded dedication ceremony Thursday, where the Obamas gave rousing speeches to an audience including three former presidents, Joe Biden, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, their former first ladies, and a host of politicians, A-list celebrities, musicians, athletes, and others. And in world news, Iran's early access to cash takes shape. Plans by U.S., Qatar would allow Tehran to use funds to buy humanitarian goods. The U.S. is working with Qatar on a plan to make billions of dollars in frozen funds available to Iran for humanitarian spending, another early financial incentive under the recently signed deal to end the war, people familiar with the matter said. The plan, which isn't completed, is aimed at giving Iran access to the spending power of some of its estimated $100 billion in cash frozen worldwide, beginning with $6 billion held in Qatar. Under the deal, Qatar would allow purchases of food, medicine, and other humanitarian goods ordered by Iran's central bank with money drawn from frozen Iranian assets, mainly cash from oil sales that has been locked up overseas by sanctions. The facility would provide a template for dealing with other pools of frozen Iranian cash around the world and a start on the first tranche of the $24 billion in blocked funds that Tehran wants released as soon as possible. Iran must still agree to the mechanism. It is one of many ideas Washington is expected to raise over the next 2 months of nuclear discussions, with Tehran following a deal to pause the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Even limited asset releases function as both economic lifelines and political signals of de-escalation, said Sinan Vakil, a Middle East director of Chatham House, a London think tank. They are one of the few concrete incentives Iran can secure with Washington to stabilize its currency and ease domestic economic pressure. Much can still go wrong, Iranian Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei said on X Thursday that President Trump agreed to pause hostilities out of desperation. This appeared to prompt Trump to hit back with his own media post. "We didn't meet out of desperation. Iran did. They are finished. We'll play out the next 60 days. They'll get no money, not 10 cents." Under the deal signed Wednesday by Trump, the U.S. is committed to making Iran's frozen assets fully available for use and negotiating a mechanism for doing so. A U.S. official said the funds will flow as long as Iran is engaging productively in talks. The arrangement with Qatar would be in addition to the billions of dollars Iran is expected to earn from oil sales, which Washington agreed to allow immediately upon signing the agreement on Wednesday. In both cases, the U.S. agreed to waive sanctions and issue authorizations as needed to facilitate the transactions. Critics of the deal say it gives Iran big payoffs before requiring it to make concessions on its nuclear program. Vice President J.D. Vance and other defenders of the agreement say it will ease pressure on the global economy by opening the strategic waterway and head off further conflict while limiting Iran's financial benefits until it makes progress on U.S. demands. The arrangement under discussion with Qatar would give the U.S. more visibility over Iran's purchases and more leverage over Tehran's ability to keep using its frozen cash. The money, which is largely from oil sales, is locked up by sanctions in countries like China, India, Iraq, and Qatar. In 2023, the Biden administration issued a sanctions waiver that allowed $6 billion in Iranian oil revenue to be transferred from South Korea, which had bought the oil, to Qatar as part of a deal for Iran to free 5 American citizens it was holding as prisoners. The funds were to be spent on humanitarian goods for Iran, but Biden froze them in Qatar after Iranian ally Hamas launched the October 7, 2023 attacks on southern Israel. The talks to arrange and release of the Qatar funds started in May when Iran's parliament speaker and chief negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, led a delegation to Doha to discuss arrangements, the people familiar with the matter said. While access to the frozen cash helps, analysts say repairing Iran's economy will require significant sanctions relief, which Trump and other top officials say would only come if Iran delivers on U.S. demands on its nuclear programs. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And in World Watch, Ukraine strikes Moscow refinery. Ukraine struck a major Moscow oil refinery on Thursday for a second time in a week, sending huge plumes of black smoke over the capital and disrupting hundreds of flights at its airports in one of its biggest drone attacks since Russia's full-scale invasion over 4 years ago. Ukraine has repeatedly targeted Russian oil facilities, aiming to cut Moscow's revenue for the war and make Russians feel the consequences of the invasion. The attack by dozens of drones came hours after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he had held an important coordination call with the French and U.S. presidents and had won pledges of further support from this week's G7 summit. And in sports, the U.S. cruises into the World Cup's knockout stage. Despite the American bravado heading into its home World Cup, there was always an unspoken fear that everything might suddenly go sideways for the U.S. national team. Maybe the pressure would become too much. What if they had simply deluded themselves? Crashing out of the tournament early somehow seemed more likely than making a genuine run. But on Friday, the Americans assuaged all of those concerns in a single half of soccer. With 2 goals in the first 45 minutes against Australia, the U.S. made a defiant statement here. This team could do more than avoid embarrassment. It was at this World Cup to stay. Within the second win in as many games, this time 2-0 over the Socceroos, the Americans guaranteed their place in the knockout stages. And unlike past editions, when they often gritted their teeth and only eked through, they've done it this time with a game to spare. The back-to-back victories marked just the second time in the team's history that it has won consecutive World Cup matches, and the first since the inaugural tournament in 1930. All morning, Americans had lined the streets to Lumen Field, chanting and progressively replacing their coffee cups with beer. And inside an NFL stadium known for its raucous fans, the Seahawks 12s, they drowned out the large contingent of Aussies in banana yellow jerseys. It's something we've been dreaming about in America for a long time, U.S. forward Tim Wee said before the game. Even more impressive was how the U.S. reached this point. In the opener, it dismantled Paraguay 4-1, while setting the country's record for most goals in a World Cup game. Then it dominated Australia without the help of its star playmaker Christian Pulisic, who was out with a calf injury. But for one game at least, the Americans didn't miss Pulisic's creative abilities. His teammates stepped up all over the pitch. Forward Folarin Balogun, who scored twice against Paraguay, tore apart the Australian defense by sprinting past a defender down the left side and sending in a cross that turned into an own goal. Then in the 43rd minute, defender Alex Freeman headed home a deflected shot to give the Americans complete control heading into the half. All they needed to do the rest of the way was lock down a physical Australian team that grew increasingly chippy as the game went on. That's precisely what the U.S. did, leaving the Socceroos with just 2 shots on target after they previously had beaten Turkey 2-0. It left the Americans strongly favored to win their group, which would leave them playing in Santa Clara, California on July 1st in the round of 32. On Friday evening, the U.S. awaited the result of Turkey versus Paraguay to find out if they'd have Group D completely sewn up before even playing their third match. And coasting into the next phase of this tournament isn't just a salve for the heartburn that the Americans tend to give their own fans. It also eased the pressure on Pulisic to rush his return as the U.S. settled for an extended run. Historically, host nations have always seen a bump in the World Cup. 6 of them, including England, France, and Argentina, have ridden that wave all the way to becoming champions. In 1994, even an immature U.S. side stepped up enough to beat Colombia in the group stage and reach the second round. 32 years later, the Americans are dreaming even bigger. And the origins of the Disney magic marketing machine. The hosts of the Acquired podcast trace Walt Disney's formula to generate reliable profits in a hits-based industry, or basically why we now buy Elsa everything. After hearing our children beg to watch Toy Story for the 1000th time, we decided it was time to answer the question, how did Disney build the best business of any of the traditional Hollywood studios? It's in an industry famous for being unpredictable and hits-based, and its classic competitors, Paramount, Universal, Warner Brothers, and Sony, have all been sold or acquired over the years. In our latest Acquired podcast, the first of 2-part Disney series, we set out to find out how Walt Disney built the foundation for the company from its earliest years to dominate the entertainment industry for decades. Appropriately, we found that answer first in the pages of this newspaper. In February 1958, the Wall Street Journal reported Reporter Mitchell Gordon laid out Disney's business model in a front-page story headlined, "Disney's Land, Walt's Profit Formula, Dream, Diversify, and Never Miss an Angle." Accompanying the piece was a now famous illustration of the Disney flywheel. Contrary to popular legend, the diagram was not sketched on a napkin by Walt Disney himself, but rather by a Disney studio artist who created it specifically for the story. Disney, as Gordon identified almost 70 years ago, isn't actually a movie business. Rather, it's a flywheel business. Under Walt, Disney built a mechanism to stabilize itself against the hit-or-miss business model of theatrical film releases. The company profits from a vast web of other stable business activities, including music, merchandise, publications, television, theme parks, which deliver the majority of their returns after the film's release and endure for decades. Disney's operations are elaborately interlocked by sharing the same core intellectual properties. Mickey, Minnie, Snow White, and Cinderella flow seamlessly from film to television to products to parks, with the animated stars' presence in each area enhancing their appeal to customers and Disney's profits in the next. The crown jewel and the key to making the entire flywheel business model work is Disney's animation division. For over a century, Disney has demonstrated a capability to generate compelling animated characters that undertake universally relatable human journeys, a timeless formula. A deep personal relationship that kids and adults form with these characters is what keeps the connected flywheel spinning. Today, theme parks have become the profit engine for the $94 billion a year company, but few families would bother schlepping to Disney World for a ride based on the Disney World box office bomb Treasure Planet. Elsa and Anna, however, pack in the crowds year after year at Epcot's Frozen Ever After, not to mention the many billions in merchandise sales since the movie's debut in 2013. The medium of animation itself is a structural reason why other film studios haven't achieved Disney's success. It is uniquely well suited to form the core of such a flywheel. Mickey Mouse doesn't age and doesn't have bad hair days and never asks for a raise on sequels. Animated characters happily lend the company their name, image, and likeness forever at zero cost for commercial exploitation. They're always available to show up at theme parks or on a set and have no problem being in two places at once. Live-action films can quickly feel dated, but Woody and Buzz remain as relevant as ever for the millions of children rewatching Toy Story's first 4 installments in preparation for Toy Story 5. However, simply churning out animated masterpieces wouldn't be enough to clone Disney's flywheel. Each movie also needs maximum distribution in order to transform into a shared cultural memory. In the studio's early days, Walt Disney was always willing to switch distributors to get his films screened in more theaters, and ultimately the company built its own distribution network in-house to accomplish this. His master stroke came with the creation of Disneyland in 1955, just as audience attention was shifting to the new medium of television. He cut a landmark deal, the largest in TV history at the time, as chronicled by former ABC president Leonard Goldenson in his autobiography, for a weekly ABC television show about the park and all of Disney's related intellectual properties. This show, also named Disneyland, was so compelling that nearly half of the country tuned in weekly, cementing the park, films, and characters in America's collective psyche. The next critical element of the company's flywheel strategy was discovered by accident during World War II. European distribution was shut down. This was especially punishing for Disney, as its films had grown more ambitious and high budget following the enormous success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. With his back against the wall, Walt Disney decided to release Snow White 7 years after its 1937 debut, hoping to generate income without incurring new production expenses. It worked like a charm, not only netting millions in much-needed profits, but introducing Snow White and the Dwarfs to an entirely new generation of American children. And thus the Disney Vault concept was born. For decades after, the core Disney properties would receive major re-releases or sequels, reeling in new generations. Disney turned the circle of life into a core competency, and a high margin one. It was exceptionally successful approach to recycling IP, intellectual property, that executives in Hollywood today are scrambling to reimagine for the streaming era. Finally, once the Disney animated IP was established in the cross-generational global consciousness, its true power emerged for Disney's business. By funneling its characters into every monetizable outlet imaginable, including merchandise, books and comics, soundtracks, park attractions, Broadway and ice shows, corporate sponsorships, Disney amortized costs across the many flywheel revenue opportunities spanning decades. This flywheel strategy that Walt Disney pioneered also evaded the risk of oversaturation. When executed carefully, deploying Disney IP in one flywheel node can actually increase demand in the others, not cannibalize it. In one example, Disney actually invented the concept of a movie soundtrack. Hearing a catchy Disney song only drove more audiences to theaters, which brought more families to the parks, which generated more merchandise sales, which deepened the loyalty of TV viewers, and the cycle continued. The trick to making it work is that ancillary channels always remained sufficiently different from the IP's primary medium, which was typically films. Thanks to its flywheel, for 60 years after the opening of Disneyland in 1955, Disney built the closest thing to a predictable business model in an otherwise hits-based industry. While the current streaming landscape has changed that somewhat, and we'll explore that in our next Disney episode coming out later this month, the core of Walt's flywheel continues to carry the company today. In fiscal 2025, Disney generated over twice as much operating income from its experiences segment as from its entertainment segment, illustrating just how the Disney magic still works. While the film studio creates the characters audiences love, the lion's share of the company's profits are realized off-screen. And in business and finance, Chinese self-driving unicorn to go public. Chinese autonomous driving company Momenta's valuation has reached around $9 billion as it gears up to list in Hong Kong. People familiar with the matter said General Motors-backed Momenta is set to raise about $1 billion via the initial public offering. The Suzhou, Jiangsu-based company, which is also backed by Toyota and SAIC Motor, declined to comment. Momenta describes itself as building the brain for autonomous vehicles and sells self-driving assistance solutions to car makers. It has partnerships with ride-hailing giant Uber and Mercedes-Benz Group on robo-taxis in Munich and Abu Dhabi, respectively. In Southeast Asia, it has teamed up with Grab, one of the region's biggest ride-hailing and delivery firms, to expand its business. According to a notice dated June 10th and published Thursday by China Securities Regulatory Commission, Momenta plans to offer up to 43.75 million shares in its Hong Kong offering. The regulator has approved this submission based on the materials provided by the company. If the listing goes through, Momenta will join a wave of Chinese tech and robotics starting lining up to tap Hong Kong's financial markets. Autonomous driving company WeRide and Pony AI, both listed in Hong Kong last year to unlock more capital to grow their fleets and develop their technology. The offering suggests that a bumper year could be ahead for one of the world's busiest stock exchanges. Companies raising around 166.8 billion Hong Kong dollars, or about 21.28 billion US dollars in Hong Kong in the first 5 months of 2026, compared with 79.2 billion Hong Kong dollars in the same period a year earlier, according to data from Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Reading Service. And cheaper alternatives to AI giants are focus of $13 billion startup Base 10. Tech executives have touted this as the year in which inference, the process by which AI models use computing firepower to respond to queries, will eat up the entire AI industry. That is starting to bear fruit. Base 10, which specializes in providing software and computing capacity to companies tapping into lower-cost AI models, is finalizing a $1.5 billion fundraising round. It will be a dual-tiered structure, with some investors putting in money at an $11 billion valuation and others at a $13 billion valuation, according to Base 10. Much of the focus of the AI industry has been on the biggest labs, including Anthropic and OpenAI, which mostly offer closed-source models to customers and users. While undoubtedly more expensive than the freely available open-source models, part of the value proposition for the AI giant is that they provide computing capacity for their partners. When you go to OpenAI or Anthropic, they obviously have their models, but they kind of give you all their inference infrastructure for free, said Turan Srivastava, co-founder and chief executive of Base 10. In the past few years, the quality gap between open source and closed source models has narrowed. At the same time, big companies and startups are starting to balk at escalating AI costs, leading enterprise customers to look for alternatives such as open source models. Open source models are created in a way that any users can download and modify them for their own specific needs at no cost. The problem with open source models is that they don't come with the necessary computing to process user queries and carry out tasks. Enter Base 10, which has built an inference software layer on top of the computing capacity it is sourcing from 20 different cloud providers. Its software gives customers the connective tissue to run, optimize, and train open source models with their own data. Companies focused on inference are becoming breakout ventures. Cerebras, a startup that has designed chips specifically for inference, had a blockbuster IPO in May and currently has a nearly $50 billion market capitalization. Fireworks AI, another inference startup, raised funds in October at a $4 billion valuation. Factory, a startup founded in 2023 that has created autonomous coding agents that plug into open source and closed source models, reached a valuation of $1.5 billion in April. Altimeter Capital, Conviction, Spark Capital, Sands Capital, and Wellington Management are co-leading the Base 10 round. Current customers of Base 10 include such companies as Cursor, Mercor, and OpenEvidence. The tech news site The Information earlier reported on Base 10's fundraising. The investment from institutional investors such as Wellington Management, which are typically more risk-adverse and longer-term holders, is a testament to the staying power of companies like Base 10. Base 10 will be Wellington's first investment in the AI inference market, said Oz Noor, an investor at the asset manager who is focused on late-stage private companies. Right now, the most popular open-source models come from China, including DeepSeek and Moonshot AI's Kimi. U.S. companies are trying to gain ground in this arena, including NVIDIA, which recently launched a family of open source models called Nemotron. If you believe open source models are always a handful of months behind the frontier models, it can serve a lot of use cases to customers while saving some share of their broken usage for the frontier models where you need the absolute best, he said. With Base 10's AI infrastructure offerings, other companies can tap into open source models and create tailored products at a much lower cost. And Trump claim draws Meloni's ire. The peace between President Trump and European allies didn't last long. Italy's right-wing Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni blasted Trump on Friday after he told Italian media she had begged, quote, begged, for a photo opportunity with him at the Group of Seven summit earlier this past week. Meloni accused him of fabrication and of treating America's adversaries better than its allies. The spat shows that the smiles at the G7 summit only papered over fissures in the transatlantic relationship. Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani on Friday said he was canceling his trip to the high-level U.S.-Italy Business Forum in Miami, where he was scheduled to meet with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Since Trump's return to the White House, disagreements over trade, Russia-Ukraine war, Trump's threats to seize Greenland, and the U.S.-Iran war, and the future of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization have bred a sense of mistrust and even betrayal on both sides. Still, Trump and European leaders made a show of unity at the G7 summit. Meloni was caught on camera saying she and Trump had never stopped being friends. But when a reporter asked Trump about their conversation, he was less diplomatic. Probably she was happy that I talked to her. I didn't have to talk to her, Trump said. LA7 reported on Friday. She begged me to have a photo taken with her. She wanted a photo with me so much. I wouldn't have done it, but I felt sorry for her. The White House and the State Department didn't respond to requests for comment. Meloni quickly shot back. The statement by Donald Trump are completely invented. They are frankly astonishing. I don't know why the President of the United States behaves like this with his own allies, she said. It's a shame that he doesn't have the same determination toward the enemies of the West, the enemies of the United States, toward those leaders. He instead shows himself to be more accommodating, Meloni said. Trump should remember one thing, she said. I and Italy never beg. Now a couple of letters from the opinion session. Race preferences are falling nationwide. The Supreme Court's 2023 ruling against the racial preferences is turning out to be a landmark with profound consequences as its influence spreads. On Thursday, the famously progressive Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled unanimously that a state program that issues scholarships based on race violates the U.S. Constitution. Justice Annette Ziegler wrote for the court that the Constitution requires that every person must be treated based on his or her experience as an individual, not on the basis of race, and that the state cannot use race as a factor in affording educational opportunities among its citizens. That must have been painful for the activist liberal majority on the court. In a concurrence, Wisconsin Chief Justice Jill Karofsky took some shots at Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard College 2023 before acknowledging that I am bound by the precedent set forth in SFFA and other Supreme Court rulings when interpreting the 14th Amendment. The case was brought by the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty against a 1985 Badger state law that reserved need-based scholarships through a grant program for, quote, Black American, American Indian, Hispanic, and some Southeast Asian undergraduate students enrolled in Wisconsin's private and technical colleges. Last week, the Iowa Supreme Court ruled that a scholarship program earmarked for Black University of Iowa students studying physical sciences was impracticable under SFFA. State governments would be wise to repeal these discriminatory grant programs, or the courts will do it for them. and private innovation's role in national defense. I was greatly heartened by Kate B. Odell's interview with Bryce Hargis and Andrew Kreitz in the weekend interview, June 13th. I spent my career in defense, acquisition, and procurement, and I have lately been unnerved to see the state at this of this system. U.S. legacy weapons systems are so exquisitely designed and inefficiently produced that we are endangering ourselves and our allies, especially in light of the rapid rise of China as a power competitor. Ms. Odell deftly describes the challenges of working within a defense bureaucracy and countering China's current overwhelming advantage in hypersonic missile technology. It's wonderful to hear that private industries have stepped forward to fill the gap. Military success is indeed a foundation for economic and cultural success in this dangerous world. And Rocky reminds us of our own 1,000,000-to-1 shots. Regarding Peggy Noonan's column, Rocky and the Love of America, from June 13th, for this kid from the burbs of Philly, Rocky was more than a movie. I graduated from college in 1976 and was planning to celebrate the bicentennial with my girlfriend. The Friday before July 4th, I got a call. The medical school I was waitlisted at had an unexpected opening. Would I be interested? It took me all of a few milliseconds to decide. My father and I loaded up the car and off we went to Chicago. Classes started on July 5th. For several months, my life was classes and studying. I was homesick. Then Rocky came out. Suddenly there was Philly in all its grit and glory. As much as a hero story, the film is also a love letter to Philadelphia. And making the case for prenups. Thank you for the thought-provoking The Cost of Divorce series, Personal Journal, April 21st to May 4th. The range of opinions was interesting. The challenge I see, particularly for professionals who marry later, is that most of us have established careers and accumulated investments, real estate, and other assets. Marriage at that stage is only emotional, it's financial. Marriage is a business, and I am unapologetically pro-prenuptial. A prenup is an insurance policy that protects both parties when circumstances change. You wouldn't buy a home without a homeowner's policy. In fact, the bank requires it. If prenuptial agreements were similarly mandatory, the process would be more straightforward and less costly than it is today. Those who choose to marry would also give greater thought to whether a partner is truly suitable. Those motivated primarily by financial security would likely opt out. That, in my view, would be a healthier institution for everyone. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Elaine. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability.